really would like to warmly welcome you on behalf of GIZ, the German Agency for International Development, and our FABRIC project. FABRIC is a development project funded by the German government, specifically the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. We are a regional project working in 6 countries: Bangladesh, Pakistan, Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, and China. So FABRIC aims to foster regional collaboration to promote sustainability in the textile and garment sector. We are all about connecting people, facilitating the transfer of knowledge, and sharing good practices. And one of our key regional partners is the STAR network. The STAR network is a network of 9 important producer associations from our partner countries. So today I also would really very warmly like to welcome the members of our STAR network who are with us today. FABRIC has implemented the conference series Asian Dialogues for Sustainability for many years now. Based on this experience, we started this series of webinars to offer an opportunity for exchange on how the different actors get through this crisis together. So as you said, we are planning at least 10 webinars, and today is the 3rd. The overall webinar series will shed light on different aspects of the crisis on the textile and garment sector, especially regarding the implications on production in Asia. So we want to broaden the view with a more positive approach, showing good practice examples of dealing with crisis at the factory level and lessons we can take on how to make the industry more resilient. The goal is to strengthen the exchange of regional experiences, good practices, and innovative initiatives to foster the development of a healthier and more resilient industry. And in this context, I would also like to thank our partners from Go Blue. Go Blue is a consulting company that advises on sustainability in the sector and has been helping us together with our moderator, Joost Wagner, in developing this series. And since our program FABRIC is about connecting initiatives, exploring synergies, and fostering partnerships, I'm very happy that we were able to join forces with the ILO-CEDA regional program, Decent Work in Garment Supply Chains in Asia. I would really like to thank our colleagues from the ILO very much for the excellent cooperation in this and other fields where we actively work together. And we look forward to conducting several webinars jointly. So with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague from the ILO to welcome you, David. Thanks again for the excellent cooperation in preparing this, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and hello and welcome, friends and colleagues, to today's webinar on business resilience amid the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm glad so many of you can join us today, whether you're just starting your day or actually coming to the end of it, as many of us are here in Asia. My name is David Williams. I'm the program manager of the ILO Sweden program, Decent Work in Garment Supply Chains Asia, based in Bangkok, Thailand. As Mark mentioned, today's event is the 3rd in the virtual series, Asian Dialogues on Sustainability, and the first to be jointly convened by the ILO as part of a growing portfolio of collaborations between our 2 agencies in the garment sector. The ILO-CEDA program was launched in 2019 with the overarching goal of bringing together knowledge, insight, good practices, and tools from across the sector in Asia, and leveraging this for enhanced regional action and on-the-ground action to drive decent work and sustainability. So with a regional mandate covering South and Southeast Asia, our project focuses on 4 main areas of action: social dialogue, gender equality, productivity, and environmental sustainability. And by investing in a combination of knowledge, partnerships, learning, and practical tools and support for the industry, we aim to be a catalyst for progress towards a fairer, more inclusive and more competitive garment sector in Asia. Which brings me neatly, I think, back to today's topic, the achievement of those high goals of sustainability and decent work. Well, they're very much dependent on the survival and the success of businesses that make this industry tick. And this is why we chose the topic of business resilience, why business resilience is so important, and I guess why so many people have registered and joined us today for this webinar. So I think on that note, I'll thank GIZ again for their partnership and hand over to our facilitator, Jost, to introduce today's speakers and kickstart the discussion. Over to you, Jost.
Thank you very much, David, and also thanks to Mark. So a few housekeeping remarks. I mean, first of all, the mics are muted at all times for all attendees. Sorry about that, but the numbers are increasing every webinar, so it's not possible to let everybody speak. The webinar, however, is recorded, and I just saw a chat message. We also have recordings of the 2 previous webinars, and please contact us if you want to have access to them. So I already recording this webinar, so that means, of course, for our speakers to be aware that you are recorded the moment you speak. The 3 panelists I will introduce in a second. However, if you want to engage with our 3 panelists, then please be aware that we're using the chat. I think most of you have already figured out where the chat box is. Otherwise, you see this little button at the bottom of your screen. It has this kind of typical chat icon, and when you click on it, you have a chance to write a message. And please, if you want to have a chance that your question is seen and answered, then please send your question to all participants. And if you want to have a question addressed to a specific person, please then write the name of the specific person first, like Raymond or Nicole, and then you write the question. Otherwise, I either have to choose someone or I assume to whom this question is addressed. And so this is how we're going to engage. We used to have a Q&A function, but it becomes a little bit too confusing. So we only use the chat. So once we're going to start with the conversation, I'm going to ask a couple of questions as a fire starter with our panelists. Then you might want to put primarily questions in the chat box, but until that time, you are most welcome to write a lot of comments and hellos in the chat box. So let me then go over to one more thing before I introduce our speakers. I would like to conduct a poll. Every time when we have the webinar, we have something what we call a mood barometer, and I'm going to start this poll. It's not a deep scientific poll, but we want to get an idea if you change your mood in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I hope this will work in a second. And so I open the poll question. And so give me a second. And I have to see, and I don't see it right now. So maybe I will ask the question in a moment later, and I start first with our speakers. So maybe I will just show my screen again, and then you can again see the speakers. So I would like to start with introducing Dr. Raymond Robertson. He's the director at the Mosbacher Institute for Trade, Economics and Public Policy in Texas A&M University. He's widely published in the field of labor economics and international economics, including a discussion paper using data from the mentioned ILO's Better Factories program in Cambodia and the Better Work Global programs, looking at factory compliance and determinants on what makes these factories resilient. So we will hear a lot about that. And last but not least, we are very happy he joins us because he got up probably at 4:30 or 5 o'clock this morning to join us here. Thanks very much for being with us, Raymond. Secondly, I welcome Ms. Nicole Chu. She's the Director of Corporate Compliance at Sabrina Fashion Industrial Corporation, a Taiwan-based apparel manufacturing group with factories in China and Cambodia. And as I understand, Nicole believes that the company's approach, mixing worker welfare and responsible relationships with buyers, is key to making sure that productivity is valued alongside workers, not in expense of them. And we will hear more about her approach later in this webinar and understand the ILO has recognized this approach and inducted Sabrina's factories to be part of its high-performing factories program. So welcome, Nicole. And then more in the middle of the day, we have Ms. Kim Van Der Verde. I think you are currently based in Amsterdam. She's an active writer and podcaster advocating equal partnerships in the fashion supply chain, but she's also a former garment factory general manager. She recently wrapped up 5 years of living in Cambodia, where she worked first as the Chief Operating Officer of Tonle, a zero-waste manufacturing brand, and later as a general manager of Paktix, a company producing primarily for the luxury earwear industry. And I understand she's also the co-host of a new podcast called Manufactured, a podcast about sustainability and the making of fashion that starts this month. Maybe we hear more about that later. So I welcome all of you, and I'm going to start with Raymond. So as you see, we have a very interesting mix of people. So Raymond, you've headed up a lot of research on global garment and textile supply chains, and in particular, the question of why some factories are more resilient than others and are more able to recover from shocks. So let me start with a very simple question. What does your research tell us about business resilience in the garment sector? So what does resilience look like, and what are the key qualities that ensure factories to be resilient, both generally as also in the time of crisis? And if you can connect it, of course, to coronavirus situation, I would highly appreciate that. Over to you, Raymond.
Sure. Thank you very much, Joost, for doing such a great job as our moderator today. And I would also like to thank the ILO and GIZ for putting together this important webinar. And I'd also like to say welcome to all the participants, and thank you very much for joining us today. This is a very important topic, and we're very excited about having the opportunity to share this discussion with you today. Joost, there's a great question, and that really is on the minds of many, many stakeholders in terms of factories and governments and other civil society stakeholders. What are the factors that lead to business resilience? Well, one of the ways we tried to answer this was to look at the garment sector in Cambodia. So we had factory level data that came out of that Better Factories Cambodia program that you mentioned. That was part of the ILO's Better Work umbrella. And we were looking at factors that contributed to the survival and resilience of firms, especially going through the global financial crisis. And there's a couple interesting patterns that emerge. If you would like to just show that slide, we could just provide some context.
Yeah,
I'm afraid that I am an economist. I've been trained in economics, and economics has often been called the dismal science. And so I have some, maybe perhaps some disappointing news today. And that is, in this figure, what you can see is just the US unemployment rates basically over the last 70 years or so. And economies go through these business cycles. So the business cycle is a normal function of a modern capitalist economy. But one of the things you'll notice in the patterns of the unemployment rates is that the increase in the unemployment rate, which is the onset of a crisis, is very sudden, and then the recovery is slower. So we have a very gradual recovery. If you look at the global financial crisis, sort of at the end of the 2000 to 2010 decade, you see the same pattern. There was a big increase in the unemployment rate and a gradual recovery. The reason why I'm sharing this with you today, and I know your audience might not be as interested in US unemployment rate patterns, but if you look at the Cambodia factory closings in the graph on the right, it seems to follow a very similar pattern. So that with the onset of the crisis, there was an increase, a sharp increase in the factory closings, and then there was a gradual recovery over the next several years in terms of fewer and fewer factories were closing. So one of the, basically the bad news that we're sharing with you today is that the recovery is probably not going to be necessarily swift. I know we're optimistic about the UK opening up very soon. We expect their demand to increase, and I know people have pent up demand. People want to get back and start buying clothing again. They want to get back in stores. But overall, there's been a lot of factors that suggest that this recovery might be kind of slow, and so it's important to just keep that in mind. Now, having said that, the research that we had engaged in Cambodia was to do some econometric analysis of factory characteristics that were associated with survival, which firms were able to more sustain the crisis and which ones were able to basically be more resilient. And so we've identified a number of factors in that study. I mean, obviously access to capital is part of it. Foreign ownership, especially in Cambodia, played a role. But the other one was improvements in working conditions across a range. So factories that were able to invest in improved working conditions along a number of different categories were found to be more resilient, and they were able to increase their chances of survival. So we're expecting to see that the sort of HR policies and improved working conditions might actually be a factor that helps businesses be resilient in these difficult times.
Thank you, Raymond. Let me maybe stop this screen for a second. So that's the big picture, Raymond. So I want to dig a little bit deeper. So what questions do you think a garment producer, and we have quite a number here on this call, needs to be asking themselves now? We are going to hear in the moment from some people in the industry about this, but could you summarize a little bit what you see as the main ones?
Absolutely. And one of the messages that come out of this research, I think, is difficult for many factory managers. And the reason just simply for that is that it's a crisis situation. We're definitely in a crisis situation. In the United States, apparel demand is down by 78% in April, and we saw similar patterns in May. It's definitely a crisis situation. In a crisis situation, you have to figure out, what do I do today, right? There's a very pressing urge to make sure that you just survive day to day. The longer term message, though, is that the crisis does create an opportunity now, because you're shutting down, because you're cutting back, to really rethink about the longer run and what type of investments might be important in the future to be ready when demand starts picking up. One of the things that we've noticed specifically is that improvements in what we call modern human resource practices in terms of pay practices and compensation are really critical, right? So making sure you have systems in place where workers realize they're going to get paid. That's the concern on many workers' minds right now, is, are we getting paid? And also these sort of modern other types of HR practices in terms of contracts really seem to matter. So can we make investments in investing in this technology? What practices have been adopted in several other countries that might really be effective in improving the relationship with workers are things that you would want to think about going forward.
Thanks, Raymond. I mean, normally I wouldn't take a question from the audience, but just in one sentence, the figures of factories in Cambodia you just showed, are they net closing figures of factories, or are there other factories opening as well? It's a question in the chat.
Sure. There were other factories being added. That's a great question. That's definitely a great question. This was just the factories that were closing. So it wasn't a net figure. This was a gross figure because we were focusing on those factories that shut down. But there were very few factories. Fewer factories are being added. If you look at the new factories, it follows the opposite pattern, right? Newer factories are being added during that time. That's a great question.
Thanks, Raymond. So let me go to Nicole. I mean, Nicole, you have been dealing with COVID-19 impact at Sabrina Fashion since January, right? When you first got wind of a new virus coming from China. Can you take us through how you experienced this and how did you respond? That would be, I think, very interesting if you share a little bit your first-hand experience.
Great. First of all, thank you to have me here today. And really like to share our practice. And we hope then we can have this chance to across, different manufacturer, then we can have the best practice to share each one. And I prepared 3 slides. I will need you to help me to play that slide. As referred to our sustainability target, we say how can we survive? And as referred to Raymond's conversation, okay, we need the resilience, and then we talk about the survive. And first of all, and refer to Sabrina's sustainability goal is, how can we ensure our business is growing and stay and stable for all the workers? The first of all, we provide a safe working environment. This is the first priority. Okay, for all those for us to able to reach this goal, and we in the head office, we form a committee immediately, which is leading by the CEO, which is our boss. Okay, each level of the management got a very clear message. And also we share with all workers to build up to their confidence, sees that Sabrina will taking care of this situation, will do our best. And the following work is we cascading all the job assignment to each level of the management, including how can we search from the local, we search the personal protective equipment resource, and the how can we follow the SOP, for example, how many times per day to sanitize your workplace, and how do we ask the workers to implement about the hand sanitizer process, and how do we monitor the absenteeism rate, including, all the SOP will clear define all the standard procedure with all locations. Because although China is the first one to review this situation, but Cambodia follow up this immediately, because the group lines, we have to make this a standard operation to each location. And we come into the next, I would say, next phase. We're talking about the financial status self-evaluation. We have to ensure there's no payment disturbing to our workers, because garment factory is kind of labor concern, industry. So we have to ensure workers' status, and that they got the they can got the payment on time. And so we do our self-evaluation, including how about the cash flow, how about the credit line, and any payment due, and how about any kind of investment revenue. So we do, if we have very, just like the Sabrina practice, we have the very healthy financial status. So we know all the payment we have on time, especially there's no payment disturbed for the workers. This is our first priority. So, and then, so we will talk with the clients if about the cancellation of the orders, so anything, so the payment deals, we can work with the brands and the buyer together. And third phase, we are talking, sorry, next page. We are talking about the production planning capability. During this critical period, about the workforce management. So how about what our hiring process? Are we going to stop that or continue hiring? Because different countries, we have the different strategies and also the planning. For example, in China, we continue hiring because government workers is not easy to hiring, from in China's labor market. But Cambodia, we freeze this, we hiring freeze for the certain things from the March, because when we review our production orders and planning, we know because we have to ensure our current labor, they have the work to do, and the production planning, and to meet our capacity. So, and also, how about the, it's about hiring, and then the absenteeism monitoring, and the overtime, and because so far the cancellation about our orders. So of course, workers overtime, will be reduced about their overtime. So before we're doing this plan, we communicate with the union and we deliver a very clear message because we need to work together to go through this tough moment. So we got their, cooperate together so they can explain to the workers. Then we can have the better result. So the basic, this three process is rolling each other, one by one, not saying, okay, we're doing this finish, then we'll continue second phase, then continue to the third phase. Actually, this is three processes rolling together, related together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nicole. And I think we're going to talk more. So this is, I think, the picture all in one together, the three phases. So thanks very much. And I'm going over to our third speaker, Kim. Paktix is a small producer with a single facility in Cambodia, I understand, with around 600 workers. So your experience with COVID-19 was maybe a little bit different in some respects. So your stint as a manager of Paktix also came to a close, I think, in March. So just at the beginning of the pandemic. So, but you had responsibility as the virus started to take hold and you were involved in all the strategic discussion. So can you a little bit share how these things panned out for you and tell us how you and of course the management at Paktix responded and maybe are still responding? I mean, as I understand, you're still in touch, of course, with your colleagues. Over to you, Kim. And you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you for the reminder. Thanks, Jos, for having me, and to the ILO and to GIZ as well, and for all the audience members for coming online at all different times of the day. Yeah, I left Paktix in March, and I'll come back a little bit later. I'll circle back a little bit later to explain my decision. But I'm still working quite closely with my colleagues there and very happy to share the situation. You said I left at the beginning, but actually I would describe it as maybe halfway through from the manufacturer perspective, because for us things really start, at least halfway through as of today, because for us things really started at the end of December. But before I go into that, I actually want to take a couple of steps back and I want to give some context, which I think is important to be able to explain the Paktix response. So the context I want to give has to do with the timeline. So Paktix, I think, and especially for those of you who are in the audience who maybe aren't from a manufacturing background, I think it's really important to understand this timeline. Because Paktix is not unique in its situation. But in a nutshell, we have to purchase the raw materials that we use during our production at least 6 months before we receive any payment. And I want to break that down into a little bit more detail. So we place orders with our raw material suppliers. We give them 1 month of lead time, and they produce for us based on a forecast. And that forecast is, let's say, an estimation of what our sales will be that we get from our brands, from the customers that we work with. And it's not committed. So that means it can change. And basically how it works is they'll produce fabric for us, white greige fabric, undyed fabric for us to forecast. And then when we get more clarity about what we're going to have to produce, we'll give the signal as to what color it should be. And then we have that our supplier has 2 weeks to basically get the fabric dyed and on a boat to us. And then it spends about 2 weeks in transit because it comes from China. Most of our raw material suppliers are in China. In Cambodia, there are no fabric mills, or not really any fabric mills. Our other options would be Thailand and Vietnam. We also get some materials from Taiwan. And then on our side, we then have a month to turn it around. So we have a month of production lead time once the raw materials are in Cambodia. And once we finish that, then it spends a month in transit getting to its destination, whether that is in the United States or somewhere else in North America or Europe or wherever that might be. But let's say it's a month to get to destination. Now, some of the biggest customers, brands that Paktix works with, operate in a way that is, well, let me put it this way. This isn't true of all of our customers, but with a lot of our major customers, this is how it works. Once the goods arrive at destination, they're put in a warehouse, which Paktix owns. So at that moment, those goods still belong to Paktix. And our customers are allowed to call off the goods for a 3-month period. And once those goods are called off, that's when the ownership is transferred and when we can invoice. So that's why I say it's at least 6 months before we see any payment. And our raw material suppliers, by the way, we pay a month after we receive the goods. And the reason I want to give this context is because I think it's really important to understand that as a rule, manufacturers assume all of the financial risk in the fashion, or quite a lot of the financial risk in the fashion supply chain. And this was already quite a precarious and vulnerable situation even before COVID. And I want to connect this a little bit to something that Raymond said, which was about unstable market demand. He said that, in April, the demand in the United States went down by 78%. I mean, that's huge. But unstable market demand is inherent to the fashion industry. It's a fickle business. Sometimes people want things and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they like a product and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they want more, sometimes they want less. And so unstable market demand really is a fact of life in this industry. And the way of coping with this risk, at least this is my point of view, the way of coping with this risk, at least right now, is to push it down to players further down the supply chain who don't have the power, don't have the luxury of being able to negotiate. And especially, I think that's especially true in the case of smaller and medium-sized factories like Paktix. And I want to take this one step further. I want to, so you mentioned I'm starting a podcast, and it just launched today, actually. You can, well, it's a soft launch, let's call it. It'll be on all streaming platforms in 2 weeks, but you can listen to our first episode on manufacturedpodcast.com. And our first episode is actually a conversation with my co-host, Jessie Lee, who has spent a lot of years working, over 15 years, working in the fashion supply chain in China and Cambodia. And our first episode is about her time with third-party inspection companies. And I want to share a little bit about this because it's going to help me to make another point, which is related to your question. But in a nutshell, third-party quality inspection companies are companies that come in and certify whether the goods that a factory has produced have been produced to a high quality standard and also delivered on time. And it's essentially, let's say, a certification. And the problem is that our customer brand sales performance will often be linked to factory performance. So in other words, brands will have, let's say, a really good season or a really bad season. And if the sales are bad in a given season and the results of a third-party quality inspection report are not great, well, that third-quality inspection report has the potential to be weaponized against the factory and to be used as a reason to request discounts or to impose penalties. So in other words, there's a link made between factory performance and sales performance on the part of the brands. And so the reason I want to bring up this example is because I think there's been a lot of outrage about canceled orders in the face of global pandemic, and as there should be, because it is a really dire situation. But I think it's really important to highlight that not paying for goods that have already been produced is nothing new in the fashion industry. This is business as usual. And yes, this is a more extreme iteration of business as usual, but it's still business as usual. And I think that that's really important context to have, because then when you lob a global pandemic, it just makes everything worse. And so I want to return for a minute to the unstable market demand, because effectively for a company like Paktix, like our revenue, you can think of it like a faucet. And when our goods are sitting in a warehouse waiting to be called off, when there's more market demand, that faucet, the water flows a little more freely. And when there's contractions in that market demand, our revenue flows is a little tighter. And so, we are already quite vulnerable to those fluctuations. And what happens when you have a global pandemic and demand drops by 70%, 78%, well, that faucet is effectively turned off overnight and your revenue is gone. And so, and I think the flip side of that, I said that for us, this crisis really started in January, is that happened, that faucet getting turned off happened in March. But from January already, we were struggling to fill orders because we couldn't get any of our raw materials. So our cash position was already incredibly tight because we couldn't get orders out. We couldn't get goods into those warehouses. And so it's kind of like a really bad sandwich that we were stuck in the middle of, because for the first few months of the year, we couldn't get orders out and we were struggling to get money coming in. And then we finally got our raw materials, and then the orders dried up. And so, it's so what do you do in that situation? Well, to be honest, it's not you don't have a lot of options, right? You either have to find ways of increasing your revenue or you cut your costs. Mm-hmm. And so in the immediate term, what Paktix did is, we had reduced hours. We extended factory closures over the Khmer New Year, which is a really important holiday in Cambodia, and we reduced compensation for everyone, and from workers to management. And management salaries were temporarily reduced by a much higher percentage than worker salaries, because of course they're a little bit more protected. But that's what we do. We had to cut our costs. And on the revenue side, in terms of being able to generate more revenue, we were fortunate that we were able to switch quite quickly to face mask production. And there were a couple of things that enabled us to do this. I mean, one is technological. We are specialized in digital dye sublimation, which is a production technique which lends itself well to customization in small lots. So that was one thing. But the bigger thing was really the support and the relationships we had with our customers, who were smaller brands, who were small to medium-sized companies, not our big customers. And I want to explain a little bit more what that means. So in the lead up,
maybe one more minute, so because we have a lot of questions coming in, and I think they want to ask.
I'll just wrap it up. But in a nutshell, in the years prior to COVID, Paktix history is working with the luxury eyewear industry. So working with some of the world's biggest brands. And gradually, over the last couple of years, we've tried to strategically engage with partnerships with small to medium-sized companies, where our value added is not just a cut and sew facility, but where we can offer a service, we can support with product development, we can be engaged as partners in that process, and we can also support with sourcing, and where effectively we are not just a disposable or replaceable factory, but we are a valued partner in the process. And those customers really stepped up for us during this time in terms of being willing to use materials we already had on hand, things we had in inventory. And it was really the strategic shift which happened a few years prior to COVID, which came in to help us. And engaging with those kind of partners ultimately allowed us to come to the negotiating table on a more equal footing.
Okay, thanks very much, Kim. Raymond, before I go over to you, and I would like to hear from you, actually, maybe you can reflect for a minute or two about it, what you have heard from Nicole and Kim, how this is reflected in your research and your experience. And I just wanted to show the poll, which maybe fits quite well now, because we have heard from some of the speakers about how important it is to collaborate together. And as I said, we always ask the same question and open normally our webinar with a question, how well people actually collaborate together. So just let's maybe take a quick mood barometer for 1 minute. So I think everybody should see on their screen a poll and the poll question. Yeah, so the title of our webinar actually is called Getting Through the Crisis Together. How well are we doing, all the stakeholders, on a scale from 1 to 5? I mean, of course, it's not, as I said before, as a good scientific research, but I think it gives us a little bit of direction. And I will show then the result in a second. Okay, so now I have to, okay, I think most people will have it. So I will close the poll in 10 seconds. And then, okay, actually automatically you'll get another 20. And then we will see the results. And then I will actually see what Raymond has to say about his research. Does it really correspond to what he just heard? So I will share the poll results, and I hope I can see them. I think you see them more nicer on your screen than I see them on my hosting screen. And so I think there is area for improvement. I think that's not surprising. 145 people have responded. I think we have to work better together, I think. So hopefully this webinar series will help a little bit to that one. Okay, so I now want to go to Raymond. Raymond, I mean, COVID-19 is clearly a significant shock when we're talking about resilience, but I wonder if you heard anything now that resonates with your previous research. Are we hearing something new, or you're not surprised at all?
Well, I'm very encouraged to see the comments of both Nicole and Kim. I thought you did a great job bringing in two outstanding panelists because they focus on the kind of the short run crisis of having to deal with safety issues. You can't have a viable factory without really dealing with those safety issues. And that's absolutely critical. And dealing with the financial thing, the financial checkup that both Nicole and Kim talked about, is absolutely critical. So finding partners that will help you with the financial situation, whether or not it's a global development agency, the World Bank or the ILO, or some other one of your buyers, might also, if you have a good relationship, I think that's absolutely critical. The other thing I would really like to highlight that does resonate with my own research is Kim's focus on what we would call in academia as moving up the value chain, right? It's value upgrading. And I think that's a really excellent lesson for many of the struggling businesses now, is figuring out not how you can survive doing what you have been doing, but how can you add value? That is absolutely critical. And the point that I would like to add to that, which I think is important that wasn't mentioned, is that a lot of the demand in the United States, right, that 78% decline was decline in retail sales, especially in stores. And stores, the retail outlet stores had already been facing a lot of difficulty going into January and February before the onset of the COVID crisis. And so there's already a real shakeup happening. So what is the solution for the small and medium-sized factories? Well, you can take advantage of your size and that flexibility that even Kim had mentioned, right? In being able to do more customized orders, do more direct marketing, and then find these smaller firms in the United States, especially web-based type of retail, online retail, that would allow you to sell more customized things more quickly, because that seems to be coming out as the future of retail, right? We don't expect a lot of these big box stores to open again now that they've been closed. So where people still had money in the United States, right? It wasn't that they didn't have money initially, it's that they didn't go to stores. And so they turned online. So Amazon was doing very well. Amazon was hiring 1,000 more people. They were increasing hiring. So how can small and medium-sized businesses in South Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Myanmar, how can you tap into those online sales as a way to rethink your business model and add value? I think that's absolutely critical.
Thanks, Raymond. Nicole, Sabrina is a relatively large company with close strategic relations with some of the biggest brands. Thinking of your three-phase response you highlighted, what would you actually say to smaller producers or manufacturers listening today, to those companies who are not as large, are facing acute liquidity problems and cash flow difficulties, and also perhaps don't have such close relations with buyers, on who might be wondering aspects of Sabrina model could be applied to their own business. So can you maybe share some thoughts on that difficult question?
Sure. During this pandemic period, though, and the Sabrina also to facing this kind of a challenge too as well. And I will say that the product diversity is very important, though. For example, and also the management agility. For example, in China, Okay, since that this virus incident happened though, so we switched that the China market to the local brand immediately. But why? How is Sabrina can sweep that quickly? Just because Sabrina, we have the reputation, we have the name already. People come to us, and since the the American and the European market, because the all the logistic issue, so we can turn to the local market immediately and very quickly. So we talk about not only for the sustainability, because sustainability is a big scope. So we can cover about we can think about what is your culture, your key product for your whole company. If you for this time you can understand what's your financial pressures from where, from because your cash or from the payment due. So it's this is about a time to evaluate yourself. And for ourselves that we understand because Cambodia is our biggest capacity in our Sabrina group. And we have almost 12,000 workers in Cambodia. So we know Cambodia is our major capacity and workforce force management there. So it's very important though to open communication with the union and with the workers. And it doesn't matter about your big firm or your big manufacturer or your smaller enterprise, even though you only have the 100 or 200 workers, to ensure you have this transparent communication with the workers. They'll be understand, because so far currently in Cambodia, we read the news about the 130 manufacturers be shut down. So people, the workers there, they all got a panic too. So how can we make this our workforce stable and to let them understand once this market rebounds, then we can move on.
Okay, Kim, in not longer than 1.5 minutes, because I want to engage our audience. They are throwing a lot of questions at you. So, so what would you say to other smaller players in the industry concerned about how to survive COVID-19, and also maybe looking further ahead, maybe some 2-3 golden nuggets, and then I would like to open the floor for the colleagues.
Sure. I guess what I would say is, for me, part of the solution to making this industry more sustainable is really about equal partnership. Equal partnership is integral to being able to go forward. And, on the supplier side, something that I think we can do to push for equal partnership. If there's anything positive that comes out of COVID is that there's so many suppliers that are hitting rock bottom, that feel they have nothing left to lose, and so are coming out and sharing their stories. And so I think an immediate thing that suppliers can do, and consumers need to hear from suppliers, is we need to come out and we need to share our stories. And that's actually why I left my job as general manager at Paktix, because I just felt a responsibility that people needed to hear these voices. And these voices are silent, and I know there's a lot of fear, and that's understandable, but we need to work together. And we need to come forward and we need to work together, because a lot of times now, especially small to medium players, we're pitted against one another. And we actually have the same interests. And there's a lot of scope for collaboration among suppliers.
And I think I wanted to remind you to put your podcast link into the chat. There was already one person asking, so don't miss the opportunity to speak to a couple of hundred people. So before, I'm gonna ask everybody to give us a 1-minute outlook into the future. How do you see the industry in a year from now? I want to ask all our participants, sorry guys, but I think a very interesting poll we developed actually also with the help of Professor Raymond. We have 3 questions for you, and I would like you to take a look so we really get a feel. This is kind of what maybe Chamber of Commerce often do, have also an outlook to the future, an opinion poll, and I think it will be quite valuable for many of us to see the results. So during the 2008 financial crisis, we went back to the pre-crisis times very fast. So now, what about the COVID crisis? Is the future of the industry, how it will be in the next 1 or 2 years? Of course, it's probably more gut feeling sometimes. And then we have 2 more questions, and the next 2 questions you actually have multiple choice. Maybe you choose 1 or 2 so that we see maybe some patterns. You don't have to click all the options. And it would be great if you help us to get a feel, and I hope I can display all the results in one go. And then I will ask Nicole, Raymond, and Kim your 1-minute take on the future. How do you see the industry in 1 year from now? And then I will definitely go into all the questions, as many as possible, for the next half an hour or 25 minutes. And please do not forget, if you have a little bit of time, you can even stay longer and chat with our panelists. So it's maybe not the most easy questions. And also interesting to see what is the most difficult problem you are facing if you are a manufacturer or producer. Okay, I'm gonna give it another 20 seconds just for the sake of time. I know we are very demanding. And I close the poll. Okay, I think I can show now the poll results, and hopefully you, again, I'm not really sure how you see the poll results. I see them in a small window. I see the industry will be very different. Many producers will disappear and business models will change. Yeah, and during the recovery, which of the following changes would you expect to see? And I see that many people see as social environmental will become more important in sourcing decisions. Automation, of course. Yes, and some people say diversification. And the last one, what is the most difficult part of the crisis for you right now if you're a producer or manufacturer? And I think financing and cash flow is a big one, and of course, business survival. So Raymond, or maybe let me start with Nicole. That's Nicole. How do you see the industry in a year from now? In one minute.
For my own observation and experience, I think the automation will be accelerated because a couple of years ago, our company already did this research. Of course, we have to wait. I mean, some of the technical issue or something concern not really can cover all the workmanship. But now I think it's the time about to move on. So automation, because the government workforce is not easy. It's got not easy to get, all over the place. So I think automation will be accelerated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nicole. Kim, how do you see the industry in a year from now?
I'll put forward what I hope. I'm not sure if it's going to be aligned with reality, but I'll put forward what I hope for the industry in a year. I hope that there will be a shift towards equal partnership. I saw that there was a question about what's required to achieve that. And I think at a conceptual level, it's starting to see your supply chain as an asset worth investing in rather than a liability to be minimized. And I hope that the focus will also be on the rules that govern and drive brand decision making, and that we will be able as an industry to take a hard look at those, because a lot of those rules are designed to minimize risk for the brand, and that's how we end up with an unequal distribution of risk and reward across the supply chain. And I hope that there will be some serious attention on reforming purchasing practices. And if you want to learn more about those, you can go to Better Buying. And that brands will make the results of their Better Buying does anonymous surveys of brand purchasing practices. And I hope that brands will start to make those public.
Thanks, Kim. Raymond, your personal take on the future.
Great. Well, I wish I had the crystal ball in which I knew what was going to happen, because I'd be a lot richer than I am now if I was able to do that. But one of the things I think we'll see is a very heterogeneous change in the industry. Some of the very large firms, you know, like H&M, are doing a very good job of paying and making these relationships very strong, paying workers in this time of crisis. And we expect that we'll see the benefits from that in the longer run through these stronger relationships, which will be key. I also think a lot of the small and medium-sized businesses are going to figure out e-commerce. So if they don't have the relationships with the biggest brands, they can still survive by doing more of this direct marketing and forming these smaller scale partnerships. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for countries, you know, Bangladesh, Myanmar, but even Ethiopia as well, because as countries try to automate, there's still going to be opportunities for other countries to pick up some of that detailed work. So I think there's going to be a lot of differences. I think the industry is going to change a lot. But eventually, I am also optimistic that we're gonna come out of this, not right away, but we're gonna come out of this stronger and I think better. So I'm also optimistic for the long run.
Thanks, Raymond. And I go straight to you with a question, because maybe I should mention again, there are two colleagues, one from the ILO and one from GIZ, working behind the scenes, helping me to prioritize question. As you see, the chat box is a little bit difficult to keep an eye on it while I'm actually looking and listening at you. So I see a question from Sadia Hamid to you. How have improved working conditions helped firms to survive when owners consider such steps as a cost increase factor?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's at the heart of the entire sort of working conditions and improving conditions concerns. There's two reasons. You have this initial cost of improving conditions, and you have the uncertainty of not knowing if those changes are going to increase productivity. One of the messages that's coming out of our research is addressed at that information. We're finding consistent evidence that those investments do pay off in terms of higher productivity down the line. And how does that work? I saw another question about what is the logic behind that. The logic is straightforward. You have lower absenteeism, you have higher worker output, and you have basically lower turnover, right? And so those three things together can help reduce the costs and make the investments pay off. But people, you know, resist making those investments because they're uncertain about whether or not they're going to work, and they know that it's an upfront cost. So again, you know, finding business partners that'll help you with those upfront costs makes a big difference. But our research shows that in the longer run, those investments do give returns in terms of higher productivity from the workers.
I think that's partly answers the last chat question coming in for you by Said Ali Zain on did you analyze those in terms of financial impact?
Yeah, the three that we really found that mattered were improvements in communication. So this is what Nicole was talking about, right? That communication is really critical, but also in compensation and modern human rights practices. If people, it's not just that you pay them more per se, it's that they understand the pay scheme and they can rely on it and it's consistent and transparent. Those types of things really improve worker effort. Right? Having these positive relationships with their managers within the factories doesn't cost you more money, but it does really improve the workers' loyalty and energy in terms of willingness to work. Workers really value their relationships with managers, so finding ways to really improve those through communication seems to, in the research, shows up as making a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Nicole, Anshu Cholas asks, did you experience any drop in productivity and significant increase in operating costs?
Operating costs, not really. For our experience, we just like normal. And operating cost, for example, actually we are less overtime. And also we don't see that much about the operation cost. But I just want to share another things, because during this period, though, actually, Sabrina, we reschedule some of our construction work during this time because we have the last working hours. But anyway, we'll put some construction work and the renovation work ahead. But actually, we should to do that. I mean, in regular time. For example, this what it is, we do the solar panel equipment maintenance in the September, for example. Then now we'll move ahead to do this maintenance earlier. So during this time, actually, we reschedule so many things to do though.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Maybe an additional question from Farouk Ahmed, also to Kim afterwards. The main challenge now for the garment exporters is lack of demand of consumers in the international market. I think we heard from Raymond some ideas for consumer demand already online. What is your experience how to enhance demand? And the same question, maybe short answers, please, of course, from both of you. How to enhance demand in your opinion?
I'm not sure that on the factory side, at least in terms of international markets, there's much you can do to influence consumer demand. But what I would say is that I don't think consumer demand has necessarily disappeared. I think it's changing. And that ties back to the Paktix experience. I mean, the demand right now for face masks is through the roof. And it's like the first time we've ever produced anything where nobody cared about price. People were willing to pay deposits. And the only thing people cared about was that they could get it tomorrow, right? So I think it's about exploring and communication with your customers about what direction is the demand going to go.
Mm-hmm. And Nicole, what's your take on it? Any thought about how to overcome the lack of demand in the international market? Any suggestion, any thoughts?
Yes, we do our, as I mentioned earlier, about the production planning. Refer to Kim's conversation. Yes, we do mask too. For this because for the demand. I think for the product diversity, and it's still very important though. And we can, just flow with the demand is very important though. And the yes, for Sabrina too, we offer more category to brands. Let them know what is our capable to do more different types of the product to attract more buyers with us.
Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a tough question, and as you're a professor, I take the liberty to ask you the tough question, Raymond. Asking how factories can be more resilient in terms of sustainability while many of the brands and buyers declining orders or even go bankrupt. Jamal Udin is asking that question.
Yeah, I saw Jamal's question. I think that is a critical question. And I think that, if there were an easy answer, I wish I could give you the easy answer. The more difficult answer really is if we sit back and think about what's going to happen next. Because of the slower recovery, brands are going to be more selective in terms of who they're going to work with in the future. I think that's going to be an issue. And when you look at brand choices of what's important to the brands, obviously, as Kim points out, pricing and risk and quality are important. But increasingly, as we saw in the poll, people are going to value sustainability issues more in the future, just because they can be more selective. And as we've seen, the factories that are able to make those investments in sustainability by thinking about the medium run will put them in a much better position to pick up that demand, which is going to be much more selective from the brands in the future. So it is very, very difficult now, but there are brands that care about it. There are brands that are willing to invest and help you do that sustainability. You have to signal your willingness to make those changes in order to make those connections. I think that's the answer.
I think there's also here a critical question from Ellie Rosita. She's asking Kim and Nicole, do you think that social dialogue can find a solution in these tough times? That's a tricky one. Kim, maybe you go first.
Okay. I think dialogue is hard right now, but I think it's essential. And, you know, just from my own experience talking to people who work within brands, I have sometimes shared anecdotes or shared personal experiences as a factory manager with people who work for brands. And I've been so surprised at the reaction. Like, you know, I told that it doesn't seem like even people working within these brands really understand the consequences of their actions on their partners further down the supply chain. And it's not because they're bad people or anything like that, but it's because the idea of a factory is such an abstraction and it's a faraway thing, and a forecast is an Excel spreadsheet, not number of people you have on your payroll. And so I think, and consumers too often don't realize that brands aren't the ones producing these clothes. And so I think that dialogue and raising awareness about how does this industry really work within the industry and beyond is essential.
And Nicole, do you think social dialogue can find a solution in these tough times, or has it?
It's very hard to say find a solution, but I think we can see this in progress because such social dialogue. Okay, we have this collaboration with the government because we follow their guidelines for this specific moment, and also how do we talk with the brand? Because as the Sabrina experienced that you know we talk with this our social dialogue with the stakeholder as the sustainability is not only for kind of okay, we can see kind of solar energy. It's kind of a service topic. We talk about the inside of management style. We talk about, okay, how can we make more kind of, for example, talent management. We talk about the talent, we're talking about the sustainability. We talk about the succession plan. And we can, how as we define as the sustainability, how can we make this conversation with the brands? I think we can say we can turn this tough time as the opportunities to make a conversation with the brands, with the buyers, with the trade union. That we've been through this process, and I think as long as we try to open our communication and share our best practice to see we are really want to go this business going, you know, to sustain our business, and we like to go in our business in a healthy way. So we need to work together.
Yeah, Saeed Salman Masood actually had a question to you, Raymond, and to you, Kim, about what may be the role of Employers Federation and other stakeholders in these difficult times. So maybe a quick thought maybe about the role of Employers Federation. And Raymond, maybe you go first.
Yeah, I think the employers' federations are very important advocates for their industries, and they've been playing a very critical role as stakeholders. It's going to be important for them to continue to advocate for their factories and try to really build that bridge with the buyers, you know, to try and balance out these sustainability versus price and quality concerns. I think the role of the employer federations are really critical. To, as Kim was saying, right, to get those voices out. I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for the Cambodian context because that's where I have experience. But my experience with the garment or let's say employer federations in Cambodia was that it was very much focused on supporting factories with legal compliance within Cambodia, especially because a lot of factories in Cambodia are foreign owned. And that's an important part of the picture, of course, but I'd love to see their remit expanded. And I just want to revert back quickly to the previous question about dialogue, because the one point I would really like to add to that is that I think that in terms of encouraging dialogue and making that possible, so there's a lot of fear from the supplier side of being, saying the wrong thing and having their orders whisked away. And I think that therefore, in terms of creating spaces for that dialogue, brands as a player in the supply chain in a position of relative power have extra responsibility for creating those spaces and for making that conversation possible.
Okay, so I see that we have about maybe 7 minutes left, and I would like to point out that in the chat there is an interesting, I don't want to say side discussion going on, but I think there are two colleagues actually having opposing views already, and I would like to ask especially Raymond to comment on that one. So Anneke Magendan says, do you think that suppliers will choose who they will produce for? In other words, that there will be a shift from social and environmental compliance towards ethical purchasing practices? Or is it, as suggested by Iran Abdullah, the opposite, that there is a high probability that the brands will eventually be working more with the cheapest factories, which may be overlooking aspects of sustainability? So, as I said, Raymond, difficult questions for you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to be overlooking sustainability issues in the future. If you look at the French due diligence law, for example, that's just one example of a sweeping movement among governments, particularly in Europe, but I don't know if the United States is far behind, to really increase the accountability of the brands all the way through their supply chains. And whether or not you agree with that, I think that is a political reality at this point, and it's going to be difficult to escape that. But having said that, I also think that both of those points of view are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Both of those things could be happening at the same time. There's going to be some suppliers, right, who are able to maneuver themselves in the global value chain where they can be even more selective about who they produce for. But it's a question of whether or not you have the foresight and you're making those investments and you're thinking about the future and you're understanding the market, right? And so I think both of those things are possible, but I think overlooking sustainability is going to be increasingly difficult.
Mm-hmm. I saw actually a question where we can find the research of Professor Raymond, and maybe either Raymond or maybe the ILO can put some links in the chat while it's going on, so where people can find the research. And I see actually, I think our colleague from ILO will put it in the chat, and I think it's coming up. Thanks very much. And so I think we are 18 minutes online. So I think maybe let's hear a little bit from our colleague, Stephen Frost. Let me share my screen for a second. Last time, hopefully. And I mean, Dr. Stephen Frost has become our mastermind in summarizing some key takeaways, because he's not only an excellent expert also on the fashion and garment industry. He's the editor of the Fashion Sustainability Week in Review, an excellent newsletter, and the director at GoBlue, but and a professor at a university in Hong Kong. But he's also very good in summarizing some key takeaways. So we asked him now for the third time to help us to have some key takeaways for today. And I would like to invite Dr. Stephen to share some thoughts, and then I will ask everybody else, or the three panelists, for a 1 minute closing thought. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Jos. Well, there's a lot here. Picking out three things is very difficult. I'm going to talk about two things briefly, and then I'm going to talk about the third one a little bit in greater detail. I think the first thing I heard here was about communication, whether it's social dialogue, whether it's with workers, whether it's with brands, whether it's industry federations, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's something that we've been talking about in sustainability for many years. And hopefully the pandemic can push that forward. And I see some optimism there. The second thing I want to pull out is something that Kim talked about, which was when she started talking about voices that are not heard, for the voice of the supplier, for the voice of the producer to be heard, and most importantly for those producers to be able to work together. That's something I've been talking about for many years, but hopefully once again with the pandemic, this might push us in the direction for that. And I thought both of those things are related to communication, but I saw them as two sort of subsets of that. The third thing, which I want to just spend a little bit more time on, is something that everyone talked about, but which Raymond classified as moving up the value chain, which is how economists or academics talk about companies being able to play a greater role than simply producing something for someone, but being involved in the product development. Now, I'm involved in doing stuff in the fashion industry now, but for many years I wasn't. And I've been quite heavily involved with both the white goods industry, so household electronics, and automotive. One of the things I noticed in automotive, particularly in Thailand, in Rayong, where a lot of the automotive sector is, was that the small automotive companies producing parts for cars, the successful automotive companies 20 years ago in Thailand were actually getting orders and then working out how the part could be made better. So we actually had factories in Thailand going back to Toyota and Honda and saying, you've asked us to make this part, but we think if you did it this way, there would be an improvement. And the Japanese brands picked up on this, and they started really working with and listening to these small, very small companies who were doing very specialized work on very specific parts. And I think that that kind of relationship between very large companies, some of the world's biggest automotive companies, with small producers really helped safeguard those companies over time. The second thing I see here, one of the so this sort of product development moving up the value chain. The second part here was online. I was reading about a very large Chinese fabric company the other day who'd seen their orders collapse from America and Europe. But what they had discovered was online. And they now say that online has saved them, and they're producing 50 textile patterns per day on their own to sell into the market online. So they've kind of developed, they were producing fabric, and now they're designers doing patterns, selling fabric online to Americans and Europeans. So this product development, this moving up the chain, this of dealing with the risk that Kim talked about, this risk that is pushed down the chain to onto the producers. It's one way of dealing with that. Anyway, back to you, Jos. That's enough from me.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen. I'm going to start an exit poll for the people who have to leave, but you don't have to leave, because we are going to keep the chat open for another 30 minutes. I hope Kim, Nicole, and Raymond have time to interact with some of the people who are still on the chat and can maybe respond to some things. However, everybody, and I apologize that I show the poll right now, but we want to have the maximum number. Raymond, Kim, and then Nicole, in this order. Maybe your 1 minute golden nugget or wish, or in summary, everybody 1 minute. Raymond, you go first.
Yeah, thank you all very much for participating. I've learned a lot from the chat and from each other, and I think this dialogue was an important first step into demonstrating how the importance of other dialogue will continue. I'm optimistic about the future, but I would encourage any of the participants who have additional questions to reach out to me directly at robertson@tamu.edu, tamu.edu. I'd love to follow up with you, and if there's anything I can for this team in the future, I'd love to support you and be part of the team. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
So then, Raymond, I recommend you put your email in the chat, or maybe one of our colleagues for ILO, if you're doing this excellent and very nice offer, then I'm sure some people will take you up on it. Kim.
Yes, thank you for having me. So my concluding remark would probably be, yes, suppliers need to and should be looking at ways of moving up the value chain, or being able to produce smaller lots, more flexibility, or maybe even online direct to consumer. But that alone is not going to fix things. And we also have to look at the broader ecosystem, which ultimately is about power and the unequal distribution of risk and reward, whether that's imbalances in power between brands and suppliers, or between suppliers and workers. And you know, the way we avoid a shift towards, as one participant mentioned, moving just towards cheaper and cheaper products, is by making that distribution of risk and reward more equal. You know, those if those brands who want to buy cheap have to front those costs of production, or have those people on their payroll, then they're not going to do it that way. So, and if there are any suppliers participating today who want to share their story, please reach out to me. If I can support you in that, I would be more than happy to do so.
And Kim, don't forget to put your manufactured link in the chat if you haven't done so. And last but not least, Nicole, you're skipping dinner for us in the moment, so that's why you have the last word.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I learned a lot today through this communication and the gathering together. I mean, it's worth to skip my dinner. Okay, I will see talk about the manufacturer side, because the subject today is about the factories to bounce back from the COVID-19. I think sustainability, we are talking about the health and safety and the well-being are the most primary and the priority. Without this essential fact there, we are not talking about the rebounds. So I think sustainability, yeah, most of the people will say, okay, this is a tough moment and we should cut down about the sustainability's expense. But I think, you know, sustainability not really, you know, you have the cost of that. It's about the capability and the competency about your management. How do you communicate with your employee? How will you deliver your message to your management and the workers? This is a very important moment. If you survive, then of course the result is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I thank you all three of you for being with us here today. Of course, I also thank the colleagues from ILO and from GIZ who worked all together with Go Blue and myself to design this webinar.